Before we talk about Solar Warden, I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine that somewhere above Earth, far beyond the atmosphere where the satellites drift and the astronauts allegedly orbit, there once existed a fleet. Not a handful of experimental craft, not a secret satellite network. A fleet of large ships patrolling the solar system looking for threats. An entire military structure operating quietly in space while the rest of humanity went about its daily life completely unaware. It sounds impossible, maybe too large to hide and too expensive to maintain. Far too extraordinary to believe. And yet the strange thing is that the story did not begin with rumors or conspiracy theories. It began with a man who logged into NASA computers and started reading files. That man was Gary McKinnon. And according to him, the files he found suggested that someone, somewhere, already had a presence beyond Earth. And he said he saw a list titled Non-Terrestrial Officers. He said he saw fleet transfer records. And he said he saw the image of a massive craft floating silently above our planet. Now maybe he misunderstood what he was looking at. Maybe the files meant something completely ordinary. Or maybe, just maybe, he briefly opened a door that he was never meant to open. Because years later, a name would appear. A name attached to the idea of a hidden space fleet. Solar Warden. And the deeper you follow that story, the stranger the timeline becomes. Because if some sources are to be believed, that fleet may have existed, but it may not exist anymore. At least not in the way you think. In the early 2000s, between 2001 and 2002, Gary McKinnon began accessing computer systems belonging to NASA and the United States military. He was not a professional hacker. He was not running complex software or sophisticated cyber attacks. In fact, by his own admission, he was doing something surprisingly simple. He was guessing passwords. At that time, the government systems were poorly secured, and some of them were using extremely weak passwords, like the word password. McKinnon said he was motivated by curiosity. He believed that governments were hiding information on UFOs and advanced technology, and he wanted to see if he could find evidence of that hidden knowledge. Eventually, he managed to access several systems connected to NASA and military networks. What he claims to have found is what made the story famous. According to McKinnon, he discovered a spreadsheet titled something very unusual: Non-Terrestrial Officers. The spreadsheet appeared to list names and ranks similar to what you will see on a military personnel database. But the wording was strange. Non-terrestrial. Not extraterrestrial, non-terrestrial, which literally means officers who are not stationed on Earth. He also said he found documents describing something called fleet-to-fleet transfers. In normal military language, that phrase refers to personnel moving between ships, or operational groups. And then there were the ship names. McKinnon said he saw ships listed with the prefix USS. He interpreted this as meaning United States spaceship, but normally it means United States ship. The most dramatic moment came when he opened an image stored inside one of NASA's systems. According to his account, it was a high-resolution photograph taken in orbit. The image showed a large craft floating above Earth. He said the craft had no wings, no visible propulsion, and no aerodynamic structure, just a smooth, elongated hull. He began zooming into the image to examine it more closely, and then suddenly his connection was terminated. The system cut him off. He never managed to save the image. But the consequences of that discovery were immediate. The United States government accused him of carrying out what they described as the biggest military computer hack of all time, and they demanded his extradition. The legal battle lasted for years, and the intensity of that response made many observers wonder whether McKinnon had stumbled into something much bigger than he realized. Here's part of the story that many people misunderstand. Gary McKinnon never said the words Solar Warden. He never claimed to discover a program with that name. That phrase appeared later, around 2006. An anonymous post appeared on a UFO discussion forum. The post claimed that the United States operated a secret space fleet under the code name Solar Warden. According to the post, the fleet consisted of 8 large capital ships and 43 smaller escort craft. These vessels supposedly patrol the solar system, monitoring incoming objects and protecting Earth from external threats. Researchers began connecting this mysterious forum post to the discoveries McKinnon claimed to have made. The idea was simple. If McKinnon really had seen fleet transfers and off-world personnel lists, maybe the forum post was describing the same program. Later, a British researcher named Darren Perks decided to investigate the rumor further. He filed a Freedom of Information request asking directly about the alleged Solar Warden program. According to the correspondence that he later shared publicly, the response he received suggested that a program matching the description had existed, but it had been terminated by the president. That answer raised an obvious question. The president at that time the story was circulating was Barack Obama. Obama took office in January of 2009. So if a classified program had been terminated by a president, it would have likely have happened sometime after that point. But another source, completely unrelated to McKinnon's story, mentions a very specific year, 2008. On a website called swaru.org, transcripts of extraterrestrial communications contain a description of events that sounds strangely familiar. In one transcript titled Extraterrestrial Message, Who Are We?, the claim is made that a secret Earth-based space fleet had been operating since the 1960s. Then comes a surprising statement. The U.S. program lost all its large ships. According to the transcript, those ships were knocked out and captured in an alleged space battle in the year 2008. I'm going to get into that in more detail in just a minute. The explanation given is that an off-world group intervened and neutralized the fleet. After that event, Earth was placed under strict monitoring. Ships attempting to leave the planet would be intercepted. Ships attempting to enter without authorization would also be stopped. The transcripts describe the Van Allen radiation belts as marking the boundary of this controlled region around Earth. Later communications repeat the same idea. Earth is heavily guarded. Unauthorized traffic is not allowed to leave or enter the planet. In other words, according to this narrative, a secret space fleet may have existed, but it does not exist anymore. At least not in the way you might think. So who was actually controlling the space around Earth? At this point, another detail begins to emerge from the Taygetan transcripts that adds an entirely new dimension to the story. According to those communications, Earth has not simply been an isolated planet experimenting with space travel. For a very long time, there have been other fleets operating in the region around our world. One of the most frequently mentioned in the transcripts is the fleet commanded by Asket. Before the current Taygetan queen, Alanim, came to power, Asket was responsible for what is described as the Taygetan 11 fleet, positioned in orbit around Earth. This fleet was not operating alone. It was part of a much larger alliance structure commonly referred to as the Galactic Federation. According to the material, the Federation had placed Taygeta in charge of coordinating the forces assigned to the Earth region. Multiple races were involved in the operation, but the overall command structure for what they described as the liberation effort for Earth was led by Asket together with Rochelle of Temer. This detail is interesting because it suggests that the forces monitoring Earth were not random patrol ships, but part of an organized command structure. The designation 11 Fleet implies that it was an operational group among many, similar to how modern navies organize numbered fleets responsible for different regions of the world. In that context, Earth would not simply be a lone planet. It would be a designated sector inside of a much larger interstellar operational network. Later, when Alanim assumed responsibility for the Taygetan government, the political relationship between Taygeta and the Galactic Federation reportedly began to change. According to the transcripts, Alanim came to believe that the Federation had been far too permissive in allowing the suffering and the manipulation taking place on Earth. This shift in perspective gradually altered the dynamics between Taygeta and the Federation, raising questions about how Earth was being managed and who ultimately held authority over what was happening here. And when you place that information beside the earlier claim that the human-controlled space fleet was neutralized in 2008, the story becomes even more intriguing, because the same individual described as commanding the Taygetan fleet around Earth is also the one said to have intervened when the human fleet was removed. In those accounts, if they're accurate, then the forces that ended the alleged secret space program were not outsiders arriving suddenly. They were already here, watching, monitoring, and waiting for the moment when the intervention became necessary. When the stories are placed together, consider these timelines. According to the Solar material, the secret fleet operated from 1960s until 2008. In 2001 and 2002, Gary McKinnon accessed NASA systems and claimed to see evidence of off-world personnel in fleet operations. Around 2006, the phrase Solar Warden appeared publicly on UFO forums. In 2008, the fleet was supposedly neutralized. In 2009, Barack Obama became president. And sometime after that, a researcher received a response suggesting that a program connected to the rumor had been terminated. Different sources, different claims, yet they all point toward the same period of time, the late 2000s, a moment when something may have changed. There's one final detail worth considering: the phrase non-terrestrial officers. Most people immediately assume that means aliens, but that's not what the word literally says. Non-terrestrial simply means not stationed on Earth, which could mean officers stationed in orbit. Personnel assigned to off-world bases, or something else entirely. The phrase itself sounds bureaucratic. like something you might find in a real military personnel database. And that small detail is one of the reasons Gary McKinnon's story continues to fascinate people. Solar Warden may be nothing but a myth, a story created by curiosity, speculation, and a few mysterious documents glimpsed at the wrong time. Or it may be something else. A distorted echo of a program that once existed? What we know for certain is this. A curious man opened the wrong files inside NASA. A mysterious phrase appeared years later, and somewhere between those two moments, a story of a hidden space fleet began to grow. Is that fleet still operating now? That's the question. But the story itself continues to travel through the quiet corners of the internet, waiting for the next person willing to follow the trail. And sometimes that trail leads to places we'd never expect to find. So what do we have here really? We have a testimony of a hacker who says he found strange personnel records inside NASA systems. We have a mysterious phrase that appeared years later describing a secret space fleet. And we have a completely different narrative claiming that a fleet once existed but was neutralized in the late 2000s. We have different sources and different stories, but they all converge around the same question. Who actually controls access to space? Because if the Swaru transcripts are correct, the most important detail is not the fleet itself. It's what's happened after. According to the explanation, Earth is now under heavy monitoring. Unauthorized ships are not allowed to leave. Unauthorized ships are not allowed to enter. In other words, the idea that humanity freely explores space, it may be an illusion. It may be false. Do our rockets actually reach orbit? Do our probes actually travel through the solar system? Beyond a certain boundary point, there are rules. Rules we did not write and rules we do not control. Gary McKinnon may not have discovered a secret fleet. He may have discovered evidence of the last time humanity tried to build one. And if that fleet really was removed in 2008, then the real question is not whether Solar Warden existed. The real question is what replaced it. Because if the Earth is under some kind of quarantine or monitoring system, then the sky above us may not be as empty as it appears. And the next chapter of the story might not be about the past. It might be about the future. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for taking a little tour down memory lane in the secret space program and Gary McKinnon and Solar Warden with me. And I will see you in the next video.